This was our smallholding 10 years ago, the very first view we had from our bedroom window on the morning that we moved in. And this is January now, comfortingly similar. 10 seasons into this journey feels like the right moment to reflect, to look back and to gently challenge what the future might hold. Our smallholding adventure has seen 10 Januaries, 10 turns of each season, and something that we're going to return to throughout the year ahead as we reflect on the 10 years that we have lived here. Now, when we first moved here, YouTube wasn't even a thought, but blogging was, and thankfully, I took some photos, wrote down some of the words from those early days, from our first year on the smallholding and beyond. But our story didn't begin on moving in day, it started well before we picked the keys up and well before we owned any land. In August of 2014, I wrote a blog post that began with a mug. I wrote about sitting with a hot drink, looking out into our back garden and physically holding on to the idea of a different kind of life. Not because we didn't enjoy the life that we had or anything like that, but we just knew that there was something different that we wanted. At that point, we didn't have land, we didn't have a small holding, but what we did have was chickens, 6 of them, in a suburban garden. And those 6 chickens were probably the first real sign that we weren't ever going to fit neatly into that lifestyle, however nice the people were and the area was that was around us. Stephen was already making nest boxes for the chickens out of bits of wood that he could find lying around and loving it just as much as he does now.
Yeah, boy.
I'm smiling so much looking back at these photos. I wish I could go back in time and tell this 10-year younger family that all of the worries and upset that you thought you were going to come across during this house sale, that panicked you during those sleepless nights, you really didn't need to worry about. It all worked out in the end. And looking at that photo, I think we should have just listened to Grace. She knew all along what was coming, and we never really stood a chance, especially where the animals were concerned. She did much better with them than I did with my original vegetable bed, which I was absolutely dreadful at. But one thing that I wasn't so bad at was continuing to make our own food, which I did all along from scratch, and even prepared this meal. I remember it well for our trip to River Cottage later on in the summer of 2015, and that was just confirmation to us that we were doing the right thing. So we moved out, we were homeless for a couple of months, where we stayed with a fantastic relative who gave us his house for a few months, and not long after that it was finally moving in day. So we'd got the keys mid-morning on the Friday and spent all of Friday into the early hours of Saturday morning moving in, and then I was up and took this photo amongst many others of showing the unchanged garden. But of course, because we had the black Labrador and the 2 terriers that we needed to take care of, then the first job was keeping everybody safe and contained, and Stephen was straight up and out on Saturday getting all of the timber and all of the equipment that was needed, something he's super familiar with now, to get this fence started. And he was straight on with it, working as a one-man band at this point to make things all secure. Post by post and rail by rail, the fences went up and jobs just appeared before our eyes. But at that point, we were just literally running on adrenaline and got things done at a rate of knots. And if you fast forward to this January, not a lot's changed there.
Happy New Year, everybody. Happy 2026. Looks like I've been out all night, and so I've brought home.
One of the traditions that we seem to have kept up with from when we moved in is that every January we set the tone for the year ahead. We sit down, we have a plan and work out what we'd like to achieve that year. And looking back, that is something that seems to have been ingrained in us, and it seems to have worked really well. And the blog back then was what kind of kept us in check. And really now, looking back at YouTube, that helps us keep the focus and understand what we've achieved, especially on those days and weeks when you think that you haven't actually achieved very much, and you look back and think, do you know what, stop being quite so hard on yourself, because we've got quite a bit done. Just as much as you also deserve the downtime when you need that as well. So being able to look back and reflect over the 10 years is something that's going to really help us in the year ahead, I think. But we will keep checking in monthly, looking back over and seeing what we've got done for the month just gone, but also how does that compare to the 10 years younger version of ourselves. On the 28th of January, I wrote a welcome to our home blog post, and if you go through any of them, you can sense the excitement. I explained that we moved in on the Friday the 15th after a lengthy and testing few months of negotiations and communications, or sometimes lack thereof. I wrote about getting the tremendously excited kids into temporarily made beds, and by 1 o'clock we'd managed to get everything moved in, all of the furniture into the room that it was allocated for, and then getting to spend our first night in our brand new home, which was absolute bliss. Looking at the greenhouse here as it was when we moved in, with the old shed out the back that quickly became Dexter's shed, I wrote in the blog that we kept walking around the vegetable plot and in the greenhouse in utter disbelief that we were finally here and slightly overwhelmed at the possibilities of what lay before us. I went on quickly to say that that feeling wasn't a negative one. It was one where there's just too many ideas in our heads that we couldn't process them all, so we went and had a drink or two to celebrate instead. One of the other things that seemed unnecessarily daunting back then was this huge oil tank that I didn't have any clue how to get filled up, let alone order it, pay for it, and when it was going to be empty. But we soon learned how to manage all of that, and looking back, it was just another thing that we didn't need to worry about. However, little did we know back then the price of oil was significantly lower than it was ever going to be, and the Aga that the dogs really took to and I loved cooking with for all of the different things soon guzzled it up. But thankfully the Aga wasn't the only form of heating. We had a log burner that was ready to go, so not only us but the dogs loved it too, which was just as well, because the way oil prices were going to go, we weren't going to be splashing out on that for very long. One of the things we were really pleased about was that our black Labrador called Buddy was able to join us. We weren't sure that he was going to be able to live his life out in the farmhouse, and he did, and he enjoyed a good few months for end-of-life care with us here. And so that was something that, looking back, I'm really proud that we were able to offer him. Stephen often looks back now and wonders why he doesn't manage to get as much done as we did in those first few weeks, but it was literally adrenaline fueled 12 plus hour days, and it's not something that you would be able to keep up for long. Burnout is an absolutely real thing. Those stables that got delivered that couldn't be delivered here just because the lorry wasn't able to turn around. So we made friends with our neighbour literally on day one. No introductions, it was just a case of, would you mind helping us out and we'll repay you sometime, honestly. And they did. They brought them down, unloaded at their farm for us, and we were able to get our barn completely set up for the horses to arrive. Back then, there was actually 4 horses that came with us, so it wasn't just the niceness of having them at home, it was the practicality of not having to pay to house them elsewhere. So it made a big difference for Stephen and I. It was a key thing to get them here as quickly as possible to reduce the outgoings. So that said, the only thing that we could think to thank our neighbour for bringing the stables down when he did was a homemade cake, and it was the first one that we made in the Aga, and I was super proud of it. Now, unfortunately, Stephen did, as always, injured himself when those stables were going up, so he sat here soaking his hand to trying to make that feel better. Meanwhile, Grace is absolutely thrilled at the thought of having those horses home. Looking at these present day clips in combination with the ones from 10 years ago, we've been doing a lot of reflecting, which is the whole point of this year coming forward and the clips that we're showing you. And we remember on night 4 of when we were living here, we'd been running at 1,000,000 miles an hour, no time to check in on each other or just to, check that things were going okay. We just had to get stuff done because we were under different types of pressure that we'd put upon ourselves to achieve these things. And then on the 4th night, Stephen remembers saying, have we done the right thing? And it wasn't a case of, did we want to do this? That was never the question. It was a case of, we've never had so much responsibility and things relying on us. But as is always the case on the Smallholding, we just cracked on through, and if you've ever seen any of Stephen and I vlogs, we always just give everything a go. Some things work out fantastically, other things less so, but our attitude really is that if something's worth trying for, then really don't give up on it too easily, because the end result will absolutely be worth it. And looking back at those first few nights and weeks, and then when things calmed down and we were able to take a little bit of time out and take stock and looked at what we'd actually managed to achieve, we realised that, this is what we want to be doing, and we were really proud of it. And with all that hard work comes some much needed downtime, whether that's with the four-legged friends or with the two-legged friends and family. So we spent a lot of time exploring the area that was all around us now. The kids absolutely loved it, and we enjoyed as much home-cooked food as we could. And I'm going to have to say, these sausage rolls were made by Stephen. I think it's the only time he's actually made sausage rolls since we moved in, but they were absolutely delicious. And needless to say, he spent a lot of time wandering around looking at what the future might hold, what projects he could get his hands on. This area here is actually where our outdoor kitchen is now, so that was a huge project in years to come.
There was originally an old septic tank under here with a big concrete slab on it, and it was too low for the bar, so we've just raised it up with a bit of decking. Also with the bellows as well, he brought us them, so we just keep them out here for stoking the fire up. All this is just again scaffolding boards just to block out, that's like the neighbours behind there, so that's just to block that out. And this old bench was my workbench in my workshop, which Tracy took a liking to, and it ended up out here, but it fits in well and it's used all the time, so it works great out here.
And speaking of which, if that's something that you might enjoy seeing, our current vlogs are showing the renovation of this room with said fireplace that's been in there untouched in the full 10 years that we've lived here. I think all that this room has had is a lick of paint and a cheap carpet put down just to see us through. So it's about time that we got on with this and got it changed, because it's going to be another 10 years before we know about it. So that will be coming in the next vlogs, along with everything else that we've got going on here on the Smallholding, animals wise, vegetable plot wise, and all of the things related and around that. And taking inspiration from what was 10 years ago, we will be putting more duck eggs in our incubator after our epic failing where we had a full incubator full of duck eggs and not a single one was fertilised. So we had to discard them all, unfortunately. But looking back, this has given us inspiration to give it another try. So please keep your fingers crossed. And if you want to see how they turn out, then please do come along for the coming vlogs to see how we get on there. And if you're interested in these monthly look backs, then also we will have another one for February at some point in the beginning of March. But until then, we're going to say goodbye and thank you very much for watching this short 10-year reflection for January of 10 years on our Smallholding.